A major transfer of power has begun in China. The country is set to appoint its new top leaders next week as part of the Communist Party Congress, which is now underway. President Hu Jintao has called on the nation to fight corruption, improve its military and keep the economy growing. Well, for more on this, let's go live to Germany. Economic researcher William Engdahl, author of Myths, Lies and Oil Wars. Well, China's economic policy has seen a slowing of the country's growth recently, a widening gap between the rich and poor, and, of course, corruption. How hard will it be for the new leaders to deal with these issues?
Well, I think the easy years of the Chinese economic miracle are behind them. And what I've seen in my recent visits to China over the last 3 or 4 years is a great sense of questioning how valid the Western, especially the American economic model is for going forward in China. Now, the party itself, you mentioned the corruption issue, and that's a huge issue among the Chinese population. I've talked with students as recently as 3 weeks ago when I was in Beijing and asked them what they considered the greatest weaknesses. And this is a pervasive sense among young people that the party leadership is not in touch with the aspirations of the younger generation or the people generally. And this is a question of the very legitimacy of the party, and that I think is a huge challenge that they're going to have to address in not just a symbolic way with the 1 or 2 convictions like you had recently with the party leader Bo's conviction and stripping of party membership. You're going to have a much more convincing reestablishment of legitimacy that the party is actually leading the country with the best interests in mind and not simply the interests of their own families and lining their pockets. And that's a difficult task, I think.
Turning from domestic matters, let's talk about foreign policy now. There are territorial disputes in East China and the South China Sea, with, of course, the US getting involved in matters too. How do you think relations will develop between Beijing and Washington? And there is talk of perhaps a military clash being likely. Is that really possible?
Well, the Chinese are very concerned about the so-called Obama pivot, the Asian pivot, which is really a China pivot that Obama announced earlier this year. And what has happened is a U.S. military deployment in Australia, in Japan, and in South Korea that really has the focus on China and encircling China's freight pathway from the Persian Gulf to get its energy supplies, its energy resources. So the Chinese see this as very much a threat. When Obama in the presidential debate referred to China as an adversary, that did not fall on deaf ears in Beijing. So they have what they see is a real security challenge that Washington, whether Obama in the next 4 years escalates this sharply or not is unclear. But certainly the tensions are very real between Washington and China, and the Chinese are quite concerned about this and are trying as rapidly as possible to counter the anti-missile defense shield that the U.S. is building up, not only against Russia, but also now against China, using Japan and Australia as a launch pad for that.
Yes, and that's an interesting point, isn't it, there? Because there we have Washington setting up those, or helping South Korea to set up those long-range ballistic missiles, and yet we've got China trying to control or solve the tensions over North Korea's nuclear aspirations. Another area of tension there.
Yeah. Well, it's like a noose that the Chinese feel is tightening around their neck, and the South China Sea, the provocations there, or in the eastern part of that, with the islands next to Taiwan, where the Japanese government made an extremely provocative move, no doubt at the behest of Washington, to claim that those islands are Japanese islands because private investors sold them to the Japanese government. Now those islands are a security necessity for the Chinese in their long-term defense, as they see it, and historically the Chinese have quite a strong right to claim those as Chinese territory. So it's a very provocative kind of pinprick game that's going on between Japan, Australia, and the Chinese, with the U.S. very much in the background.
William, just quickly, your thoughts on the matters of dissidence and democracy. There are major topics concerning China at the moment. Will a future leadership react to these criticisms from the West?
Well, I think the future leadership has to be more responsive to the concerns of genuine Chinese, not calling for a breakup of China into little fiefdoms, as some dissidents have recently done. But Chinese youth are very concerned. They consider themselves patriotic Chinese, but they want more freedom of expression. And I think the important thing for the party leadership is to show the younger generation that freedom carries with it responsibility. And how that is going to work will be a crucial test of the very legitimacy of the party leadership over the next 10 years. So I think China is facing a challenging time. It's a fascinating country with huge potential for stability in the world, actually, if they play it right. And that's going to be something that the world is going to be watching very closely.
Economic researcher and author William Engdahl, thank you very much indeed for joining us live there from Germany.
Thank you.